welcome back. Today's video is titled Guerrilla Warfare, and unfortunately it's not the Mortal Kombat or fighting that you may have been looking for, but rather a play on words for the political and economic state of a country in Africa. So you walked into that one if that was your reason for being here. Without further ado, let's get into the who, what, when, where, and why. So, the who, there's 5 major parties involved. The first one is the country itself, and particularly their Ministry of Hydrocarbons, the Democratic Republic of Congo. And for the purposes of this video, and because that phrase is very long, we're going to be referring to them as Congo or the DRC. And like I said, their Ministry of Hydrocarbons is a governmental agency that's basically in charge of the environmental side of all legislature that's passed. The second party involved is the president of the DRC. His name is Felix Tshisekedi. He's important because he represents the DRC on the world stage, especially at conferences surrounding climate change and all kinds of environmental protocol. So he's the second party. The third party involved is the Congolese taxpayers or the citizens. They're obviously directly impacted by whatever policy is passed in the government, so they're an important player or factor. The fourth group involved is world leaders. Now that's very vague, but it includes all major world leaders that are involved in climate reform. And the final party involved is Greenspace, a environmental advocacy group. They have a lot of work in Congo, but they're not the only environmental group, so I'm going to be using them as just a representative of all environmental groups or climate change advocacy groups that are represented in the DRC. So that's the who. Now the what. Again, I'll paint a little bit of a story in terms of what's been happening. So a couple months ago, the president flew to a conference called the COP26 conference. It was a climate change reform conference and basically endorsed a 10-year agreement to protect the rainforests of Congo and other nations. And the leaders that were at this conference pledged a combined $500 million over the course of the next 5 years to Congo to make sure that it preserves its natural rainforest habitat and the species that live there. So that's a great move. Like, you would think that's such a good thing that's happening in this world. Now, things were going pretty well until the Russian-Ukraine war hit. Now, I'm thinking that there is a theme with these videos in that Russia and Ukraine has to be mentioned at least once in these videos. I don't know. It just has to be. When that war began, actually, there was lots of problems with the oil that I've already touched upon in a previous video. But oil and gasoline prices soared everywhere, and the supply of oil and gas was very limited because of this war. And if you want to know why, check out that video. But the world needed oil, and they had to turn to some place that had oil. And Congo is a relatively impoverished country. They don't have that much capital or a great GDP or anything that would classify them as a developed nation. So any kind of foreign direct investments in the nation is a good thing, as long as it's not harming other groups. So Congo began to auction off vast amounts of land, particularly peatland in a national forest that was rich in oil and rich in carbon. And the problem was that this was a direct contradiction to the agreement that was signed in the COP26 conference that was basically protecting that area of land. So now you have this area of land that is being auctioned off by the government. So environmentalists are mad. Citizens are happy because they have a source of income now. And other global leaders kind of in the middle about this because they, on one end, need the oil, but on the second end have agreed to endorse Congo with $500 million. So it's kind of a default on a contract. Now, the when. Like I said, this began 8 months ago. So the COP26 conference was held in Europe 8 months ago. And the auctioning off has started at the end of July and beginning of August. Now, the main area where this is occurring is the Virunga National Park in Congo. It is a huge area of carbon-rich peatland and super rich in oil reserves. And it is the world's largest peatlands, actually. So that's where the majority of this auctioning of land is happening. And finally, the why. Now, Like I said, there's many players that are involved in the situation, though everybody has different motives. But the motive for the government, and they've said it themselves, and I quote, "Our priority is not to save the planet." From anyone else's perspective, that might not be the best PR move a country could make, but from their own perspective, they need their citizens to thrive first and foremost, and that's where their priority is. And knowing that if they do auction off vast amount of land, they bring citizens job security and salaries that are associated with that drilling and that fracking of oil. The government states that instead of 25,000 barrels of oil a day being fracked in the country, with this auctioning off, there would be about 1 million barrels that would be auctioned off. That's equivalent to, and I'm reading this off, $32 billion a year, which is more than half of Congo's GDP right now. So you can see how that kind of auction is going to bring in a lot of money for these people that are in a desperate need of it. It raises a very difficult and philosophical almost question that with regards to ethics and politics and their intersection, and that is, which need is prioritized more? Is it the need of collective humanity 20 years down the line, or is it the need of a government's citizens currently? And that's a question that a lot of policymakers are asking right now. So that's the why. Now, the implications. There's 3 major implications to this. The first one is a global climate catastrophe. Like, with the amount of oil that could be taken out of this national park, there's so much carbon that's being released into the environment again. And I'll read a quote from Simon Lewis, who is a professor of global change science at the University College of London. And he says that opening these forests to oil developments will lead to hunting, deforestation, oil pollution, and carbon emissions. And the peatlands store about 30 billion tons of carbon, which is equivalent to about 82% of annual carbon dioxide emissions. Basically, in simpler terms, that means that the amount of carbon emissions that are going to be released as a result of the oil fracking is equivalent to about 82% of the annual global carbon dioxide emission, just to put that into perspective. So could be a very bad global climate catastrophe as a result of this. The second one is something that is often overlooked, and that is animal endangerment. Now, the Virunga National Park is home to 1/3 of the endangered mountain gorilla population, hence the name guerrilla warfare. Like, come on. Okay.
Yeah, that was good. That was good.
So because of oil fracking, there's going to be a lot of habitat destruction in this area, obviously directly impacting the mountain gorillas that live there. So again, an interesting question: do we save all of humanity? Do we save citizens of Congo? Do we save the endangered mountain gorillas that could potentially go extinct because of this? All very interesting questions to ask. So that's the second implication. And the third and final implication is social unrest. So like I said, groups like Greenspace and other environmental groups are already advocating for change and for a different way to reach this oil capacity that's needed for the entire world, and a different way to help impoverished people of Congo that doesn't also harm the natural habitat and the rainforest and the mountain gorillas that are endangered, along with the other species that are already residing in this national park. So with that, there's already a lot of lobbying and protests that are happening in Congo, as well as all over the world, to stop this auctioning before it gets too bad and before all these other catastrophes could happen. And obviously these things are irreversible, so stopping them now is the biggest problem that these groups are facing. So again, 3 implications: a global climate catastrophe, you're endangering or the potential extinction of mountain gorillas, and social unrest in an already unstable country and a relatively impoverished one as well. So social unrest in that situation is not always the best thing. But those are the implications. That's all I have for you today, and thank you.